Welcome back to the Playbook podcast with Sharon and myself, Michael, from Builder Studio, where we build stellar companies together with entrepreneurs. And today we're going to talk to an entrepreneur that has just started her entrepreneurial journey. And we'd love to know more about that. Today we're with Evelien from Dembrane. Evelien, could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, hi. My name is Evelien. I am 28 years old. I am Dutch. I live in Eindhoven. It's also where my company is based at the moment. And I'm really happy to be here today and share a little bit about the crazy roller coaster that this startup journey has been so far.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for coming over and thank you for joining us during the PlayPod. It's amazing you started this journey, but share us a bit more. How did you start this journey? What was there like upfront before you started?
So upfront, before the startup was there was a wonderful relationship. My co-founder is also my partner in life. And the initial idea actually originated in his master thesis. He had been working quite a lot on information design, as it's called. And as we both have a technical background, we met in our bachelor's degree. For him, information design was how do you design information flows? How do you make that accessible to people? Yeah. But also how do current information flows obscure a lot of data, create polarized imagery, if we think about media, social media, and what are the effects actually of this on democracy? That was kind of his...
Almost the damages of it.
Exactly. And so very much from a design philosophical perspective, he wrote his master thesis on this and came up with this idea of how do we create what he calls a node transitive system. What means
I need to write a paper, so
use all the fancy words.
All the fancy words. He's very good at this. But it basically means that everybody is equal on the platform. You have the same number of neighbors, so you don't have people with hundreds of followers and people with 5 followers, where obviously somebody who posts something with hundreds of followers gets much more likes, more likely for the post to go up. Yeah. And that's not necessarily ideal for having a good democratic process. So he designed the architecture and the philosophy around this of how can the digital space be used to better democracy.
You fell in love with his research as well, huh?
Yes, I did. I would definitely describe myself as a people person. Like I have a lot of passion for people. I think people are wonderful and inspiring, and I'm deeply curious by nature, so that works really well. And then combined with my fascination for technology, like the first time I really got triggered by technology was when I saw this nano paint where you could change the color after it was applied. Mm. And I was like, this is magic. This is futuristic stuff.
That's a while ago, though, huh?
That was a while ago. I think I was 16 at the time. Good. But that was what sparked my fascination for tech. Been down that road. And in his thesis, it inspired me to deal with my struggle. I have a research master's, done a lot of qualitative research because of my passion for people. But there's also this bottleneck that I experienced every time because it's so hard to go beyond an end value of interviewing more than 25 people.
At some point.
Exactly. And until that point, you're always extrapolating. And there are so many questions, urgent questions, wicked problems that need people to be involved. But how can you actually do that at scale in a way that people can talk along and you don't just end up sending surveys for forever?
Or influencing themselves or,
as well.
Peers.
Absolutely.
So you dig deeper, you took his research, and then you continued on that.
Yeah,
and
so
that is how you ended up creating your company.
Exactly. Yeah, so based off his research, I brought it back into practice. I was graduating on the topic of digital participation. Well, he made a very interesting proposal of what the future could look like. But so in my own research, I looked at what were we already doing and why was it not actually addressing the core issues of participation and why current digital tools are not the solution quite yet. When you look at the experience of the participants specifically, people still struggle to feel heard. People still feel like it's difficult to understand how their insights are contributing to a project or a plan. So digital tools don't necessarily solve that. And also, if it's just me asking, what do you think? What is your opinion? Which is basically what surveys are.
Yeah.
decision making.
Survey can be like unbiased. This could already be, I'm basically, the way I say it is already influencing, the outcome.
Absolutely. The question you ask is very strongly linked to the type of answer you get.
I'm curious how you solve that with tech, because I feel like tech can be leading as well, but yeah.
But I love that you really started your business only based on research. That is like what an entire startup studio is about, doing research before you start a company. And I think we have talked already with over so many entrepreneurs, and they always just start because they feel like it. Mm-hmm. But how do you feel that you started with this deep research before you actually did think of turning this into a business?
It comes back to the story for my love of people. So I was a research assistant at some point in a big European project, and the project was called Innovation and Healthcare for All. And I was like, this sounds amazing. We're going like into the fields, visiting different European cities, learning from the people in the field. What are the challenges, best practices, knowledge exchange, all the fancy buzzwords, all the good stuff. And then in the session itself, you would see that there's maybe 4 to 6 practitioners present. You spend an afternoon doing workshops with these people, but then you have 4 people from the field. All the rest are policymakers and researchers. So the setting is already not
debatable.
Yeah. And then this is the data we take and we debate about it and we extrapolate and we build on top of it. And as a young researcher, I was also like, but we just talked to 6 people. Like, that can't be sufficient. Why can't we talk to more people? Why are we not going into the hospitals and interviewing?
What was the answer there? I'm really curious.
Budget, time.
And in terms of quality, what would be the reply then? It's good enough?
You cannot state truths or facts, but you can make recommendations or interest areas or...
Okay, like you can basically downplay the outcome.
I wouldn't want to say it like that, but yes. I suppose.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways. I mean, it's the worst outcome, right? But I can imagine that will be frustrating as well. I mean, how many cities did you touch? I mean,
so I joined to 2 out of the 7 cities. Yeah. So it's quite still some cities, but for me, the fact that it was called Innovation and Healthcare for All, and that the for all part was just so underwhelming, was a moment where I was like, okay, if this is what we say we want to do, and we do it from a research and academic rigor standpoint of view, we know that their end value is too low, and then we can send surveys, but I also feel that we really want to have these conversations with people because they're so rich and there is hidden nuggets that you might not find in your survey. So it's a bit of a lost opportunity. And at the same time, there's so much funding that goes to these kinds of projects. So how do you really make the most of it and how do you do it justice?
Yep.
That's a really big one for me as well. So, and next to that, I've done a lot of community organizing myself. That was what I did next to my studies. And even if you have the intention to get everybody involved in figuring out what the next steps are, what is our code of conduct going to be, what kind of activities do you want, even if it's your full drive to get as many people as possible on board, it's still really hard. It's still really time intensive. I was a volunteer and a student, so you have limited capabilities at the same time. And this was one of those other places where I was wondering, how can I put the community, the members, how can I empower them to participate, to co-create in a way that it, for me as an organizer, doesn't mean I need to stop studying, basically.
There you go. Yeah. So how you turn it into a business? I mean, I know what you're saying here, but it sounds almost solving your own frustration, which I always feel. No, it is, right?
It's a good driver.
It's one of the best.
Yeah.
So at what point you're like, okay, so now I'm going to turn this into a company. What happened?
Well, so my co-founder was already working on building a team, because basically every startup starter's guide, first thing you do is you need to build a team of...
Yeah, people, sure. Team, yeah.
You need some people to be crazy enough to join you on this adventure. Otherwise, you're just going to be alone screaming at people. That's no good.
You're screaming at each other, right? You're the both, yeah, so... That's the beginning.
Well, in the beginning, so I wasn't involved when he was initially building the team, and because I was still studying, I was really busy, and he was still working as well at another startup to kind of like gain insights on what to do, but also mostly what not to do.
So he was doing a side gig and creating...
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
And at some point, he really wanted to do something for the team that he was trying to build, like create a moment. And I do a lot of community organizing. I was like, oh, well, I can help you do that. I can figure out a nice thing to do, some way to bring the people together and see if you can build a cool team. And that was the moment where I got involved. And after that, I basically didn't drop out anymore because I was like, oh, this is really awesome. And this is really cool. And I was getting started.
He passed the first gate. He said he's able to get a team on board, including you.
Yeah, for sure. And once I start something, I really will see it through to the end. I'm not known to be a quitter. I'm loyal to my own detriment on occasion, but especially if I believe in it. So,
and if you can boil it down, what do you believe in with Dembrane, right? Because the research you started, the broad application of this it's massive. But I can imagine to get the team on board, you also need to make it a bit smaller. So what is you at the core?
At the core is with Dembrane, we give everybody a chance to speak and be heard, and we ensure that no good idea is lost. So that when we organize these sessions, at least we make sure that we capture the conversation, the richness of insights, the arguments for and against, and the consensus or conclusion at the end. What can we settle on together as a group? In a nutshell, most boiled down version, that's what we currently do.
Awesome. So always at the end, you guys are basically validating what you've done is also what the group thinks is the result.
So the actual group validation is something that's going to be part of our second wave of release. Right now, what we have built is very simple app. Scan the QR code, kind of like Mentimeter style.
Yeah.
Turns your phone into a recorder that streams directly to our backend, where we get live transcription of the conversation, the dialogue, the brainstorm session. And then we can give you insights about what was said during these sessions within a day, basically.
Tell us a story about this, though, because I can imagine it's very impactful, right? And you're recording stuff. Takes a while for the mind to get used to the fact that they're being recorded. Mm-hmm. What's the impact or the application of this, right? You get that recording. What comes out of that? Could you give an example?
Yes. I also want to respond to the thing, what's the impact of it? Because this was something that was really funny, especially getting started. People are very much like, oh, but then are people being able to say what they really want to say, or are they filtering themselves? Like, are you not worried about that? And what was really interesting to see, so what we always say, we only turn on the recording after the introduction round, because we don't care who you are or what you do or where you're from. What we care about is capturing the conversation between the people and seeing the ideas that are shared.
And you do allow them to do the introductory round to the rest of them, so they do get that input before you start recording. Yeah. They do, you don't. Okay, got it.
Exactly. And so what we do very often, what we call the host, but more traditionally our client, has a certain question they need to ask their members. It can be one big research question, it can be really open, it can be more specific. But then based on all these conversations and the questions from the host, we generate answers with the transcripts that we gather on the questions that the host asks. So it's really based on the data specifically that comes from these conversations, and give you a first insight. This is the other thing. We always say this is not a perfect plan. This is not something where you should just take it and leave, but it gives you an 80% quality of insight of what's happening in your group and how they're reacting to it.
Do they treat it that way, though? To go out the door, you say it's 80%. What do they do? Do they actually take it as 80 or just go with it?
I think the richness and the opportunities that we can identify through this are inspiring. So it definitely also inspires to act. And because you get it so quickly, whereas traditional methods, qualitative research, like before you have the insights, can take weeks. In those weeks, your project or your proposal is not being worked on. Whereas with our tool, you can really quickly get those insights and then start thinking like, okay, then we still need to explore this or we still need to do that. And that moment of sitting still for 2 weeks, you can actually use it.
And you're now sitting still for...
like somewhere between 1 to 3 days.
That's a lot of crunching. Is that all done on the back end with tech, or is there some intervention from you guys?
Right now, there's still an intervention from us because we really started just from going to these participation brainstorm sessions and exploring, okay, how can we actually supercharge or support your session? And from there, we slowly started building up the tech. So where initially we were very much consulting with a little tech layer where we're just testing features that were going to be part of our product. We're now actually getting to the point where we're releasing our first standalone MVP, so people can actually start doing it themselves.
Very interesting. Break it down for me. So if you do the recording, do you actually split up the participants yourself?
No.
So you're using the voice of that group. I'm assuming there will be multiple groups in a bigger session, right?
Yes.
How do you weigh that in, though? Is it like the results from one group is basically your input, or is it individually per person the input?
It's per group. So the idea is in a brainstorm session, you will have 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 different groups working on problems, discussing with each other. And then we look at the data from all the groups, looking at, okay, so what are common themes? What comes back in every conversation? What is important to everybody? Where is the field of tension? So where are some ideas maybe opposing one another, or they're talking about the same thing but have a different solution for it?
You can hear the emotion, basically, right?
Yes, you can hear the emotion. Right now, especially in the first phases, that was not something that we really took along in the analysis. But as AI gets better at this as well, that's becoming more and more interesting. And that's kind of the exciting part about what we're building. As AI gets better, our tool gets better. And that's...
everything gets more fair as well. That's a good mission to have.
So going from the 80% where you're at now to the 99% within how much time?
That's a great question. Honestly, because we're about to launch our first standalone product, I find it hard to tell you what exactly will happen in terms of
all
timeline.
entrepreneurs promise something, right?
Yeah, you need to have a promise.
That is fair. That is fair. I think we will be able to get there maybe within 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
But for me, like in 2 years, I'm going to turn 30. By that time, I want to have a democratic layer where people can talk to each other and connect over difficult issues, where it's not only you talking to the people in your bubble or only relying on media, because this is something I saw in a lot of the experiments that we did, even on topics that are quite in the media polarized. For example, the introduction of AI. When you put people together to talk about it, you don't have a pro-AI or against AI.
Yeah, there's
people are aware that it's here now.
Yeah.
And the question is, how are we going to deal with it? And that's a very constructive question to ask and to talk about together, instead of saying like, what do you think? Are you in favor or against AI? That's a bit of a, in my opinion, a non-question.
Yeah, and can you then summarize your mission?
So the mission is indeed to give everybody a chance to be heard by others, and to make sure that these ideas are not lost. The bigger picture, so if we're really talking also vision, for example.
Yeah, let's go.
Then we're really seeing this as like the democratic people layer in data-driven decision-making. Right now, if we talk data-driven decision-making, it's very quantifiable. It's very much sensors over the city, and based on that,
it's a 0, 1 or something in between.
So where is the layer where people talk about that? What is the experience of this quantifiable data, and how can we actually allow people to participate in that in a way that it doesn't cost us crazy hours to set up a conference and organize the location? And is there a way that we can do that much more asynchronous, much more regularly as well, increase the continuity?
To be honest, if you take this to the extreme, then all companies will have, with this entire tech wave, let's say whatever remains is a very creative and big part of your company's, core. Mm-hmm. I can imagine it's also a big part of business, basically, right? The one thing, the strategies and how to get to the end results, keeping people happy, is mainly this, stakeholder management, knowing what's going on. Do you see this or foresee this happening going into business soon? To basically say, look, I'm not saying it's the community voice, because in business there will be some layers that are, weighing louder than others. But I think the main thing, when somebody leaves a company, it's not for the money. It's something, not heard, basically, if you boil it down. How will that future look like, or are you already doing it?
So we stayed away from the corporate in the earlier phases because we really wanted to be with the people that were doing participation on the ground. Like, what are the values? What do you care about? But what you're saying is definitely something that we see, where in the end we hope Dembrane can be used for any organization that wants to involve their members to co-create, to be involved in strategy, in goal setting, in transformations, giving people a chance to speak. We also see, for example, the company culture surveys. I think most of us know them. Generally, 7.5 is the outcome. And
depends on the culture and where you ask, which city, which country.
Definitely. Looking around me and in the most companies that I have heard about, it's like quite average outcome in score. And there's always an element of like, I would like to be paid more and to work less hours. These are quite common, but they don't give you a feeling of what is actually going on. So having a conversation, understanding, having different branches of the organization talk to each other as well, building something that's much more cohesive as a culture, that's also something that Dembrane facilitates as a second order benefit, because you allow a space for people to talk to each other.
So in terms of ethics, how far could you go?
Well, the people need to stay in the loop. So the transparency is the hardest thing. So if you just record the conversation and then post the results and then say, this is it. Right now, our prototype, that is what it does, but that's not where we want to go. You want to make sure that also after the recording has finished, that the people who participated can say, okay, this wasn't a very important quote for me, or this element I find really relevant. And then if you have the results, can you also, again, invite people to interact with that so that you keep the transparency and the democratic nature of the entire exercise alive?
Which definition of democracy do you use, I guess, right? What is your base layer?
For me, democracy is about the act of having dialogue with one another and figuring out what are the values on the table, which ones we cannot compromise on as a group, and what are we actually going for? What do we want to achieve together? And in my opinion, I don't think the current democratic process facilitates this at all. We vote once individually every 4 years. If we look at TV, we see debates. I have a point, you have a point. We go into a discussion trying to prove either the other person wrong or yourself right.
It's more media.
It's media, but it's really not how to bring people together and make sure that they can collectively align and feel connected towards a certain challenge. Right now, that's just not
it's
in the
either
culture.
left or right. There is not like, let's balance it out, get in between.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas so much of the interesting dynamics happen in this gray, muddy middle.
It's also becoming more creative in the end, right? Because like if you then get to the answer, which then probably is also something what you didn't expect, what's going to be the outcome, you get to a whole other level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's the nice element of having this open format, being able to go into conversation, because it might just flow into a direction where you didn't expect it. But apparently it's important for the people. And that's one of those things otherwise you would have never find out.
Yeah. And since you already shared with us, you are now focusing on smaller companies, I think, not on the corporate side. But within smaller companies, you have all different types of people within these groups probably who are involved. Do you then also see, depending on the company, that sometimes you have like a bigger voice of like the people who actually never speak up, and then like there is like a less stronger voice of the ones who are actually leading the company? Can you already recognize that, or?
So one of the things, so we do breakout groups, and for us, in theory, the ideal number is 3 people in a group. Why 3? Because 3 is a very easy number to regulate yourself. You can kind of tell, okay, now I have been talking for a while and I would really like to hear what you think. And
Yeah.
It didn't happen here, right?
Never.
No. No.
So that's a really important thing. On the other hand, there will also be people who are not big talkers, but maybe they ask that one question that nudges a conversation in a different direction, or unearthed something that was kind of on the surface, but nobody said anything yet. The fact that there's space for that person to do that is much more important than how many minutes they speak. And that's also, we were initially also experimenting, like, should the AI keep track of how many minutes everybody spoke?
And you see that in several of tools.
Exactly, and then
keep
nudge
a
the person
percentage.
like, hey, speaker 3, we have not heard you in a while. Please state your opinion. And you're just a little bit like, that doesn't actually help the conversation and might even block a person
It's also
more.
a bit against to what you're doing.
I think we have a lot of trust in people that they actually want to figure out something that works together, something that you can be proud of, and a moment where you feel like, I really connected, I felt heard, I could share an idea, I learned something. Like, that's a very energizing experience for a person, and also something that's not a given in our society today.
It's going deep though. Could I go double click on one thing though? You just said, hey, speaker 3, speak up. So are you or are you not using the individual voice as a measure?
So we are not using it as a measure. We have done tests where we experimented with it, but for now we reasoned that it wasn't important enough for our application. And if anything, we were also talking about people feeling comfortable. People feel more comfortable when they know there is not direct diarization tracking. Our transcripts are just a big blob.
I can imagine that, yeah. So now, look, if you just record it and do everything by hand like you did at the beginning, as you told us before, right? More of a consult.
Mm-hmm.
You could get to results, but I'm assuming there's some deep tech behind this. Take us to something. I saw on your website also you did like a project with together with OpenAI, right?
Yes.
They put some effort into that. To get to that result, what would the tech then do, right? So how do we trust this system to get to a result? Tell me, how are we actually going to believe that what's going to happen behind the scenes is helping us rather than, what we're used to?
Yes. So when we're talking about the data digestion, so to speak, or the analysis of it, we have different steps. But a very important first step is that we always use the data that we've gathered. So we're not going onto the internet, bringing in different documents.
No pre-trained models.
No pre-trained models. It's really, this is your data frame of reference. Mm-hmm. This is what we're going to work with, which takes out most of the kinks. That's not to say that there's never an hallucination. That can definitely happen, especially in earlier models and in the phase that we're in, because it is a new field.
Could be beautiful conclusions, though. Could be very creative.
Some of it is really creative and exciting. Some of it, you're like, this does not make any sense. Yeah. Where did that come from? And then we check in the data and you cannot find it back. And you're like, okay, that does not make sense.
Let's do it again.
This is also why later on, the validated learnings with the participants is going to be really important. So right now, we don't have that yet. So we take the different conversations, we make summaries per table, and then we summarize over tables. We break it down into the research questions that are there. And so there's always these steps of how you break it down. Now, I can't go into too much detail on what's happening all behind the scenes there.
Sure. I'm going to ask anyway, yeah.
But if you then have to explain it to like one of your customers, how do you explain it? Because like, of course, you're really technical and a lot of people probably who are trying to use your product, they're not. If they don't feel that trust, how do you give them that trust?
Yeah, good one.
Well, it's something that we see also because we're an early startup. So the people that we work with right now are just willing to give it a shot because they feel the pain, they feel the frustration. There is clients where we do it alongside a more traditional method where there is a team of researchers involved that do note-taking during the sessions and then go back and put the notes together and digitize them and analyze them and make clusters.
Influence them.
Do all of this.
Yeah, they do.
This a bit more, that a bit
less.
Oh, I couldn't see this.
Also, this is sorry to jump my answer, but it's something that's really interesting, where the question we got asked a lot in the beginning, can you trust the AI, and how transparent and how biased is it really? And then the moment you start using it, you also realize that these note takers have been instructed with a certain agenda, have been in a culture, they know what they need to pay attention to, and there's an overwhelming quantity of data happening in a conversation.
You could argue that they hallucinate maybe 20 times more than your model will ever do.
I would maybe not call it hallucination, but they will write things down in their own words because they need to keep up or they need to be quick. And especially if there is like no audio recording and transcription after the fact, you will have to work with the notes that have been taken that day. And you can't really go back to your data because you can't ask anymore, like, hey, where in the conversation did this happen? What was the argument around that?
The human brain fills in the gaps, so you could say, argue it's the same thing.
I think that's a creative act, and that one is still really important. And I would love to see Dembrane as a tool to enhance that creativity and to be able to scope possibilities and work together, maybe more with our tool, than really seeing it as a replacement, because that is definitely something that is core to Dembrane. The fact that we use AI is not because we're trying to replace any person. We're trying to empower people in this exercise. And that's a really big difference, I think, in the way we talk and think about AI.
So then they trust it?
They actually do, because you can really see and recognize your own words. So whenever we build up an insight, so you have the research question, you have your themes underneath that, and the themes is built up from different insights from different groups. And these insights from the groups are built up on quotes. So you can go down back to the quote level, and people can look at it and go like, oh yeah, we were talking about that. Or didn't you say that? Or like, oh, I think I heard that in the other group. And there's some moment of recognition where we talked a little earlier about how hard it is to recognize yourself after you've stuck a lot of Post-its and then you see, okay, this is the outcome. Yeah. It's hard to understand what it is that you actually contributed and in what way. And that's something that we're trying to make a lot more transparent. So in terms of the outcome, I think because we can go back to the quote level directly from a transcript, people trust it more.
So what remains then as biggest challenges moving forward? Because look, I want to know how the tech works, if it's learning or is it, you do some of it summarized with a model, I get that. But it seems to me you're also doing some machine learning to train whatever the weighing of the, whatever the emotion, voices, opinion is. What challenges are left? I mean, on business and in tech, well, maybe you have some as well, Sharon.
Well, I think there is still a really big challenge to actually make this part of our democratic culture. At least here in Europe, I feel like there is something where we have a really big opportunity to do that. And on the one hand, we can think about our local communities, our neighborhood, smaller companies, then thinking a little bigger companies, municipalities, maybe regional places. But I really like to think even bigger and really think also about a European level of talking to each other. So it's not just connecting within your country anymore, because so many of the challenges we face today that are urgent and pressing require action that goes cross borders. So how can you facilitate this? And again, there is so much opportunity with the tech that on the one hand we are developing, but also so many other companies are developing. I can see ways that we can actually come together and maybe still stand a chance to do something about the big issues we are facing today.
Love that.
Yeah. Do you have an opinion on that yourself?
Well, look, I think the challenge here is bigger, right? I mean, those are on a mission level. So on the tech level, because basically let's take this to the extreme. You talk to the same group 5 times. Mm-hmm. Basically, you now have some sort of a digital model of what they're saying and doing. How do you extrapolate this into, are you using it as a hive at some point? Is it always unique for any community or gathering at the same time? Are there these challenges to begin with? Or they're so far off and you're going into, hey, you're being a bit bad and you're using it for the wrong reasons?
I mean, great question. I think, so we're currently not training our own model yet. We are not there. But if I think about the ambition of the type of model we want to train, it would be a model specifically designed for dialogue and helping to know how to ask the right questions. I think this is something that is really crucial to having a good conversation. It's about delaying your own opinion in that moment, but rather asking a question to try and understand better or unearth a value that's underneath it, where you can kind of get closer to the root of why a person thinks that way. And that is something like the ability to ask good questions has become much more important since the introduction of the AI, I think, because it can generate anything for anyone with any type of content or theme. So you need to know something about the content, either to be able to ask that critical question, which is, again, why it's so important that we talk with people from the local community that have deep experience of their situation. But the ability to ask that critical question is something that, as a researcher, I've been taught, but is surprisingly hard. And I still see researchers that still also struggle to ask that critical question on their own research, on their own projects. And that's something I think a model that really tries to focus on how do you get to a good conversation where people actually feel like they can share something that is deeply true and grow also understanding and empathy in your conversation partners.
For me, it also feels a bit like that is the way how you use or how you want to use AI. Asking the right questions to get to the right results. Before or back in the days when we didn't have that, it was about like, okay, where can I find it? And now it's more about like, how can I find it? So I think it's like all linked to each other in a way.
Definitely. And it's funny that you say it in this way as well, because we put in a presentation like 2 weeks ago where the question is no longer if we should engage people in discussion, but the question is how.
Yeah.
And it's very much this, indeed. How do you get the right information? How do you find out what it is that this group cares about, but also how does the group fit in that bigger picture of an entire community or a company or a country?
And do you then think that you can get to a level that you can actually support every single soul?
Every single soul?
Yeah.
I would like to think that by being able to bring people into conversation and giving people that moment of realization of, oh, we're not that different when it really comes down to it, and we are still together people and we all want to live a happy, healthy life, that there is a little bit of peace in that can maybe put a soul a little bit at rest. It won't be a solution for everything that an individual might face. I wouldn't say that, but
we are working towards that, right?
Yeah.
So
You never know.
look, maybe that's a good one to close off if you'd like. So basically future vision, right? So I was just checking out what NVIDIA was doing. They're, in a sense, also worried about the fact that if we create models that speak to each other, how should they speak to each other? Should they speak as a hive or individually? And we know the answer here. It's individually is what we adore the most. They're putting those, they call them NIMs, they call the architecture the same way. It's very confusing, but they put their, let's say, virtual personalities into a room to get to an answer, right? So there is always one that's the leader that is now allowed the host to ask the question, so that influences a lot. Seeing these things happen, right? You must be opinionated about these things as well, but what's your future vision look like? Is this something core to life with more advanced technology?
it's something core to life with more advanced technology, but also with ever increasing densities in cities and more people moving in. Like, it's just getting more crowded. We need to find a way that we can actually still make people part of our process rather than trying to automate it all above us and then just creating some strange top-down structure that's just pushed down your throat. That's a terrifying idea. That's the side of AI narratives that I do not feel comfortable with at all. Like, the human element in it, how do we interact with it? How do we nudge it? How do we give it the right directions? That's an interesting question for me. The automation, sure, you can automate all kinds of things, but how do you make it ethical? How do you make it work for people? How do you get them involved? I think those are the crucial questions.
It's getting back to the empowerment of the people instead of turning it around.
Look, if we use GPT and other stuff that people, every day use long enough, you'll get to the same core question. This is now a flat, unopinionated system, right? Just automation, no humanity. So, you're treading around the subject here a bit, but I'm saying it's core to what we're doing, right? It's not just the humane side, but also for the technology side moving forward. It won't get better until we fix this. How can we actually have that voice in there for, I wouldn't say just the group, but also because you don't want to talk back during your research, which is interesting, but also to make sure that people know how to use it. So it has to have that piece of, I think you use soul. I think that's a good way to put it to everybody understands it, which it's lacking at some point right now. So okay, let's see what happens. Phew. Any other future visions you'd like to share with us? Because we can go for hours, or we go to this last part we always like to ask.
Other future visions. Well, honestly, I think one big, hairy, audacious future vision is a lot to consume most of my thought at the moment. But maybe to bring a little bit of more nuance into it. What I really hope, I was talking a little earlier about better levels of empathy because we go into conversation with each other again. For me, that also very much come from this desire of understanding the importance of diversity, of inclusion. I think it's so important because cities are getting more crowded and people are fleeing for all kinds of reasons. How do we remain human in the face of distress and having distressed people around us, creating space for people to still feel safe? And whether that is because you had to flee or if it's because you don't fit in a normative lifestyle, you might be otherly, you might just have something that makes you different.
Yep.
And how do we embrace difference again? And for a future vision, I would like to see a society where we get better at recognizing the importance of embracing that difference because it holds so much potential and there is so much that we can learn from each other, I think, if you ask the right questions.
Well, on that note...
Nice.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, really insightful. I like every time we went into tech, you brought it back to the, to the human as well, to the individual, right? I think that's the part where, if we're not careful, we're losing. I would say also in implementing the tech, not just with the tech.
Yeah, and I think it's also really close to what we're doing and what we are believing in. Because like the reason why we build tech companies, it's mainly because we believe that tech is not there to replace the people, but to empower them, to then give them actually the opportunity to do what they actually like to do instead of just like following all these mundane tasks. And that's why we focus on creating companies for the future of work, because work and life, it's getting way more intertwined every single day. And talking about work-life balance, it doesn't exist. So I think we are really close and aligned there. But yeah, to close it off for today, we have a question for you. One of our previous guests asked that. So we are really curious about your answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a...
I think I already know the answer.
No, I'll keep it. You better keep it for yourself. This is a hard one. So, who is the person that inspired you the most, and in what way?
That is a really hard question. So, the person that inspired me most, and in what way? So it's probably an author. She is no longer around. Her name is Audre Lorde. I read her book, Your Silence Will Not Protect You. She was a Black lesbian poet, warrior, mother, and one of the first professors back in the day. And the way she stood up for what she believed in and made us aware of how there are systems of oppression in place that separate us from each other, that separate us from ourselves, and how painful that is in the societies that we are creating. I think this book was like written a lot of her work was late 60s, if I'm correct.
Damn.
And it's still so relevant. Reading her book on how staying quiet is not something that is going to protect you is really inspiring and gave me a lot of courage to start speaking up and start dreaming a little bolder, a little louder, and seeing who I could find that was also triggered and inspired by what I was sharing. But also it's been really hard as a queer person myself to find a role model in tech where I'm deeply inspired and feel like, okay, that's how I'm going to go down this route, because tech is still a environment where being a woman, but also being queer is something that's still quite
So still searching for that
sensitive.
one.
It's still different.
That's a work in process.
It's still different. Yes, that was indeed the little link to my
Well, look,
final statement as well.
You must be very inspiring for the next generation to come. I mean, you're not the first professor, but you sure as are gonna continue her life's work, right? It's a lot of the same, so maybe it should be you.
I, more than anything, want to do it justice. And I think being right now visible and also becoming increasingly more open about my queerness in this space is something that I do, so that when there is a new queer person entering the tech startup world, that they know there was at least one person that went there, that was queer,
before.
that was okay.
There you go.
If that changes one person's life, then I already made an impact there.
Yeah.
Well,
Great.
On that note, huh?
Yeah. Do you have a question for the next guest?
So something that I would really like, I like to think that each one of us has a gift. And so my question to the next speaker would be, what is your gift and how are you giving that back and into your work and life around you?
I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much for having me here. My first podcast experience.
You did a great job. Loved
you.
talking to you. So thank you so much for being here and to coming over and to have a chat with us today. I loved that we could go really deep into tech, but also talk a bit more about all these human things. So thank you.
The pleasure was mine.
Well, on that note, I'll do a short outro if you guys like, and we'll do this in one take. So, guys, thanks for tuning in again into the Playbook podcast. Today, we talked with Evelien. I mean, we went everywhere. But I think what struck me most, though, is that no matter how high-tech we can get with current technologies, we should wonder, is this actually making us better? Should we think about more about the individual than just what we get out of this large model? Are we then being, unique and creative enough? And this could go a long way, right? We're looking for a way to replace ourselves, do our own strategies, but we need some more of the, who are we talking to in the first place anyway? So I think a great playbook on how to look at AI from a different angle. And tune in next time where we go a bit deeper into how to actually implement that AI and pop that important question you just asked. Thank you so much. This was me, Sharon, Evelien, Playbook Podcast. See you next time.